On September 17, 1967, the news broke of the discovery of a shipwreck of the Adriatic islet of Gnalic, headlined 16th century galley, a merchant or a pirate ship. Unfortunately, information about the site also reached the global circles of ill-intentioned visitors to the seafloor, who looted numerous items from the rich undersea site over the following decades, and much was irretrievably taken from the country. Art historian Sofia Petrizioli, member of the core research team, talks about these earliest events.
Kralo se na veliko, tako da su ti spužvari znali da tu ima nešto, ali nisu htjeli reći da su i oni dobivali, ako pokaže lokalitet, neku nagradu.
In less than a month, in cooperation with the Croatian Navy, a rescue campaign was organized in order to protect the site from looting. It was led by Professor Ivo Petrizioli from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and Ksenia Radulic from the Cultural Monument Protection Department, both in Zadar.
Ja sam bila zadužena da u Zadru primam materijal. I one ekipe su tamo, moj muž i Ksenija, su bili na terenu i onda su brodovi dovozili do Zadarske rive i onda u naš muzej.
On their very first dive to the depth of about 24 to 27 meters, the divers saw the remains of what appeared to be a large wooden ship.
Nisi znao što prije vidjeti, dotaknuti praporaca, sitnih perlica plave boje, najviše i šarenih. To je razasuto po svukuda, a i prije svega ogromne količine stakla. Ogledala, okruglih stakala, pa onda romboidalnih stakala.
The site was covered with glass, guns, anchors, huge scattered boxes containing parts of chandeliers and many other objects.
To je fascinantno, pogled ti samo bježi, leti, kutije sa britvicama, bačva puna slame i među slamom vidiš brončane svječnjake koje u prvi mah se nije niti dalo prepoznati.
Mi smo stara generacija, mogu tako reći, i klasično smo obrazovani. Mi smo učili slikarstvo, skulptura, arhitektura. O umjetnom obrtu niko nam nije govorio. Tako da zapravo ovo što se našlo u Gnaliću bila je 100% nepoznanica za nas.
In just 4 days, 7 guns, 2 iron anchors, a large quantity of glass objects, parts of brass chandeliers, and an ironclad wooden chest that attracted the most attention were brought to the surface. Many assumed that the chest was the ship's cash register. But soon after the opening, the excitement of the audience subsided. The chest was full of black mud and apparently did not hold anything of value.
Tu je bilo puno radoznalih ljudi, jer oni su svi u gradu, i novinari, ne znam već ko je sve bio, očekivali da je to neka kasa blagajna od kapetana ili nešto tako, i sad su ili nešto crno, počeli smo izvlačiti slamu i smrdljivi neki mulj, društvo se razišlo i onda smo nas, ja, Ksenija i moj muž, počeli to izvlačiti i onda smo vidjeli da je to neki tekstil.
Actually, the chest contained a wooden box of weights and a precision scale, 3 linen shirts, 8 woolen caps, and 54 meters of luxurious damask silk.
Kad je to došlo kod nas, prestalo je oduševljenje javnosti. Onda smo morali mi nastupiti.
To those who expected gold, these items did not seem precious at all. But the mud-covered textile was the real historical treasure. Numerous items of the ship's armament, equipment and cargo were raised to the surface. 7 bronze guns were recovered that belonged to the ship's armament, 2 of which were marked with 1582 and the initials of Zwane Alberghetti, the famous Venetian caster. This was the first clue to the age and origin of the ship. In October 1582, Pope Gregory XIII decreed that 10 days be skipped when switching from the Julian to Gregorian calendar. Although Italy was among the 5 countries that adopted the new calendar system, the hassle that this decision created lasted for decades. Many objects belonging to the ship's equipment were also found, such as 2 anchors, a pitch cauldron, a portable heater, and utensils from the ship's galley. At first glance, it was clear that the ship was carrying a huge amount of cargo, from raw materials and semi-finished products such as brass and tin rods or white lead to finished metal products like large ceiling chandeliers, razors, buckles, candle snuffers, and wooden boxes full of spectacles. Among the largest group of finished products were glass vessels and other objects, goblets and jugs, decorated bowls, bottles and flasks, sprinklers, decorative glass beads, mirror glasses, and a huge amount of round window panes. The research continued in 1968, 1972, and 1973. On land, the team diligently continued to clean and conserve the recovered artifacts.
Ja sam imala jedno skladište puno neočišćenih stvari. Što se tiče stakla, moj muž mi je pronašao 3 studentice i onda smo mi na terasi muzeja prali solnom kiselinom, ispirali, a ja sam to onda spremala u kutije i inventirala. Što se tiče svih ostalih predmeta, Vilhar je napravio u svojoj kući u dvorištu malu radionu i on kako bi šta završio, doneo bi meni, ja bi to inventirala, spremila u kutije opet u tu moju famoznu policu u mojoj kancelariji. Tako da je sve staro od žive, stakla, kapa, sve je bilo u mojoj sobi.
Thanks to the long-term efforts of the staff of the National Museum in Zadar, in particular curator and director Sofia Petrizioli, conservator Božidar Vilhar, and his young collaborator Ivo Donelli, some of the finds were restored for display at the local heritage museum in Biograd na Moru.
Ja sam se rasplakala kad je došao taj kamion i odneo. Kao da su mene odneli. Jer ipak 10 godina sam radila i to.
And then it stopped. With the exception of one tentatively organized research campaign in 1996, under the leadership of Zdenko Brusic, Gnalić was left at the mercy of the sea for the next 40 years.
Nije bilo više novaca. Nije bilo. Bila je nesretna i pročitali ste, rekle, završava Gnalić i ko zna kad će se nastaviti. Evo da se nije pojavila Irena, ne znam da li bi bilo još nešto.
It was not until 2012 that Irena Radić Rossi, an expert in underwater archaeology, decided to grapple with Gnalić's secrets. Determined that this time the research would turn into a permanent project for the preservation of European and world cultural and historical heritage. Art historian Josip Belamarić provided great support and assistance in restarting the project.
Arheolog, istraživač uvijek pokušava te svoje krugove suziti. Irena je obratno, jedan rijetki tip istraživača koja širi te krugove, koja kooptira ljude kako problemi iskrsavaju, ona ih jednostavno suradnike dobiva bez problema i zapravo naravno galvanizira i svojom strašću i kvalitetom materijala i to je zaista, meni se čini u ovom času možda najinternacionalniji, ako se to tako može kazati, hrvatski projekt.
Dr. Radić Rossi gathered an international team of scientists to put the ship again under the watchful eyes of experts. The modern professionals were armed with experience and new technologies, while inheriting from Ksenia Radulić the awareness of how rare and valuable the shipwreck near the island of Gnalić really was. The research began with a modest excavation campaign in 2012, with the aim to examine the condition of the site. After determining that the site was still well preserved, despite decades of negligence and looting, systematic action was launched.
We were fully aware of the fact that despite the rescue research conducted in 1960s and 1970s, when a lot of items from ship equipment and cargo came to light, there was still a real treasury of data on late Renaissance shipbuilding, seafaring, and trade waiting for us on the seabed.
Throughout, great attention has been paid to the ship's structure, which is being gradually uncovered every year.
We are recording every nail hole and every fastening and every scarf, and because we would like to know how they were built. That's the ultimate purpose of this, the nerdish part of archaeology, the nuts and bolts. Then we have the history.
To date, the stern of the ship has been explored, forward to approximately the ship's middle. Last year, the excavation reached the level of the first deck. Everything has been documented in detail, and a researcher from Japan, Dr. Kotaro Yamafune, is in charge of keeping the photogrammetric documentation.
Fortunately, we have a lot of timbers left. So this shipwreck will be the kind of game changer. So after we finish this excavation, I don't know how long will it take, maybe 10 years, but we will know what is going on with Mediterranean 16th century ship construction. So I'm so excited.
Every year, new finds emerge, and who knows what else awaits archaeologists under the sea.
It's a very organic thing, and we would love to have a good idea of these inhabited machines that would go around the Mediterranean, carrying dreams and ideas. And it's not just the silk, and it's also the people, and it's also the relations between these two worlds, the Ottoman Empire and then Venice, and not just Venice, the Venetian network of traders. It's very interesting. And the house in which they were all confined, the floating little village, is there for us to now reconstruct.
There is still a lot of work to be done. For example, 72 types of variants of glass beads have been recovered, requiring painstaking study. Many groups of finds still require accurate study. What the experts have learned so far is only a small tip of the iceberg.
Finding a ship like this is really a rare discovery. But finding all the documents which speak about people and events linked to the ship's story is a dream of every explorer.
We have two amazing investigators, Mariangela Nicolardi and Mauro Bondioli. They are doing an outstanding job. They have already collected an enormous amount of information, not just on the shipwreck and the history around it, but also all the people in the network.
Meanwhile, while the team is working diligently in the field, Mauro Bondioli and Mariangela Nicolardi began their own excavation in the Venetian archives, recreating from multiple documents the ship's complex historical story.
Irena Radic Rossi ha pensato di mettere nel team anche dei ricercatori che appoggiassero, oltre alla ricerca archeologica, anche la ricerca d'archivio. Ormai in 5 anni, quasi 6 anni di ricerche, siamo riusciti a ricostruire gran parte della storia di questa nave.
Although we are irresistibly attracted to the objects found at the shipwreck site, what gives a completely new dimension are people whose stories and even destinies are related to the ship Galiana Grossa.
Venice. The year is 1567. Merchants Benedetto D'Alezze, Lazzaro Mocenigo, and Piero Basadonna founded a company and arranged for the construction of a large merchant ship to sail along western trade routes to the coasts of the Iberian Peninsula, Flanders, and England. They decided to entrust the construction of their new ship to Francesco, the son of Antonio da Curzola, from the present-day island of Korčula in Croatia. Antonio with his sons emigrated from Korčula during the Venetian-Ottoman War, and his family was accepted in Venice thanks to their great shipbuilding skills, of which the 3 Venetian citizens boasted in front of the minor consul. The Senate accepted the proposal and ordered Antonio, his sons and 2 other natives of Korčula to work in the arsenal under the same conditions as all other shipwrights.
E quindi abbiamo scoperto che il costruttore della nave veniva da Curzola ed era venuto insieme ai suoi parenti, a suo padre e ai suoi fratelli a Venezia, e per esempio abbiamo scoperto che la nave fu veramente costruita in laguna a Venezia.
Of all Francesco's shipbuilding activities, only the 1561 data on the construction of the ship Bonalda Estampa of 1,000 barrels of capacity have survived. However, it is certain that at the time of the order to build the ship Lezza, Moceniga e Bazzadonna in 1567, he already had notable experience. This is supported by later autobiographical documents, in which Francesco takes credit for the invention of 3-decked ships. By the end of 1569, the 3 ship owners had hoped to launch their ship and send it on its first voyage to the west. Their expectations, however, were disrupted by the Senate's decision to ban sailing from November 20th to January 20th. Following the disastrous sinking of the ships Viviana and Querina in the waters of Cyprus, the latest in a series of incidents caused by overloaded ships coupled with the dangers of winter navigation. This, although only for a limited time, reintroduced the tradition of closed sea, mare clausum, which in antiquity forbade navigation from November 11th to March 10th. In September 1569, the ship was finally ready for launching. Probably concerned about the situation in Northern Europe, the 3 ship owners hastily equipped the ship, whose carrying capacity was estimated at 1,200 Venetian barrels, or about 720 metric tons. However, just as the loading of cargo for the Western market began, an order arrived from the Minor Council to unload the ship and make it available for the transport of the army and supplies to Cyprus. On January 25, 1570, the Senate ordered the arsenal to equip as many galleys as might be needed for the development of future events, and supplies for Cyprus were to be loaded on 3 large ships.
È successo che nel 1570, poco prima dello scoppio della guerra contro i turchi per Cipro, Alvise Finardi comandava una nave, la Dolfina, che si trovava proprio a Cipro. Nello stesso momento si trovava anche la nostra Galliana Grossa, che all'epoca si chiamava Lezza, Moceniga e Bazzadonna, il cui capitano era proprio il costruttore di Curzola.
During the navigation of galleys to Cyprus, the envoy from Constantinople read in front of the Venetian Council the Sultan's letter of ownership of Cyprus, the content of which was already well known to the Doge and his advisors. It was an incredible statement that was rejected with disgust, and the so-feared war with the Ottomans finally began.
Mentre i veneziani sapevano che i turchi avrebbero cercato di sbarcare sull'isola, il comandante Marcantonio Bragadin delle forze veneziane ordinò alle 2 navi di andare in un certo punto dell'isola di Cipro, chiamata Le Saline, per caricare tutto quello che era possibile caricare, merci lasciate dalle altre navi, per poterle portare a Famagosta. Le operazioni, i 2 comandanti obbedirono, andarono in questo posto, ma alle Saline di Cipro non c'era una guarnigione per poterli difendere e l'equipaggio delle 2 navi aveva paura di essere impegnato nelle operazioni di carico proprio mentre la flotta turca stava arrivando, e quindi cominciarono a mutinarsi e forse erano d'accordo anche i capitani. In ogni caso le 2 navi non obbedirono completamente agli ordini di Marcantonio Bragadin e anziché portare le merci a Famagosta andarono direttamente a Venezia.
A few days later, the gendarmes of the Council of Ten boarded the two ships with an arrest warrant for the two commanders. Alvise Finardi and Francesco da Curzola were accused of disobedience and escape during their stay in Cyprus.
Quando le autorità scoprirono che Alvise Finardi e Francesco Valencic erano scappati da Venezia, li condannò in contumacia, cioè senza la loro presenza, a morte mediante impiccagione fino all'avvenuta morte. E di solito questi impiccagioni avvenivano fra le due colonne di San Marco, in una piazza pubblica dove tutti potevano vedere.
Thanks to their own ingenuity, they managed to avoid the death penalty.
In the year 1569, I took command of the Dolfina ship. For your serenity, I was expedited immediately with ammunition and 500 infantry for Cyprus, between 14th and the 2nd of March 1570. The captain of Famagosta sent me and two other ships, the Moceniga and Justiniana, to the salt marshes to smuggle a quantity of ash, with the evident danger of losing the ships for so many legal causes. It is why, for the salvation of these ships, we resolved to bring them back to Venice, knowing how much your serenity needed them.
Nel frattempo però era scoppiata la guerra contro i turchi e i due comandanti non lo sapevano prima, però quando arrivarono a Venezia non solo scoprirono che avevano disubbidito un ordine di un comandante veneziano di forze militari durante un periodo di guerra, ma che era stato emesso dal Consiglio di 10 l'ordine di cattura per essere imprigionati, processati e condannati. Probabilmente quando arrivarono nel porto di Venezia qualcuno dei parenti o del costruttore di Curzola o di Alvise Finardi li avvertì del pericolo e loro scapparono insieme e si imbarcarono ad Ancona sulle galere del pontificie che stavano per recarsi a Messina all'incontro di tutta la flotta cristiana per combattere i turchi e che poi avrebbero combattuto a Lepanto.
The command of the ship Lezza, Moceniga e Basadona was taken over by the experienced commander Domenico Di Giovanni. At the beginning of July 1571, the ship set sail from Venice for Corfu, transporting troops for the War of Cyprus. The infamous Uluc Ali, a native of Calabria with the real name Giovanni Dionigi Galeni, who was then the governor of Algeria.
The name Giovanni Dionigi Galeni, assumed after he converted to Islam, circulated in Europe in many different forms. Uluc Ali, Uc Ali, Luc Ali, Oc Ali, Uluc Ali, among the many others. These were all mispronunciation of Uluj Ali, that meant Ali, the Christian renegade.
Uluc Ali attacked the ship on July 21st, 1571. Despite the numerical superiority of the Ottomans, the Venetians, with heavy losses, successfully repulsed as many as 3 attacks and killed part of the enemy troops. The Ottomans finally defeated them and Uluc Ali captured the ship.
Uluc Ali, or Kaluch Ali Pasha, was indeed a frontierman, as many others at that time. He crossed the Mediterranean as a slave, as a corsair, and then as a Kaptan Pasha, in debt with, just like the Galliana Grossa. And he remained in between these two worlds that, although seemed to be in continuous conflict with each other, did not stop to constantly and osmotically communicate.
Just a few months before one of the greatest naval battles of the 16th century took place, the Lezza, Moceniga e Basadonna had fallen into Ottoman hands. At that time, Pope Pius V had been working tirelessly on the alliance of Christian forces in the Mediterranean. In 1571, the Holy League was founded, an alliance of Mediterranean countries with one goal: stopping the Turkish expansion. The battle was of such magnitude that almost the entire Mediterranean civilization took part in it. Even the Spanish writer Miguel de Cervantes participated. His own ship Marquesa was an integral part of the Holy League's fleet. A good friend of Alvise Finardi, Giovanni di Vrana, took part in the battle as a naval admiral of the Holy League.
Giovanni of Vrana, originally from Vrana Fortress in Beograd hinterland, emigrated due to the Turkish invasions and built up a great naval career in Venice.
He was positioned in the heart of the battle to the left of the ship of John of Austria. Giovanni di Vrana served under the supreme Venetian commander, Sebastiano Venier. The Battle of Lepanto was the last major naval conflict in which ships used oars. At dawn on October 7th, the Holy League fleet sailed toward the Gulf of Patras, and a conflict with the Turkish fleet under the command of Muezzin Zad Ali Pasha began. Uluç Ali, who had captured the ship Lezza Moceniga e Bazzadona a few months earlier, commanded the left flank of Ali Pasha's fleet.
In Turkish sources, instead, after 1571, is referred to mostly as Kılıç Ali Pasha, where Kılıç, though, is not another mispronunciation of Uluç, but rather the honorary title that Sultan Selim II gave Uluç Ali after he appointed him Kabudan Pasha, Great Admiral of the Ottoman Navy.
After the death of Ali Pasha, the morale of the Ottoman fleet was seriously damaged, and the Christian forces won.
Followed the great Ottoman debacle in Lepanto, where Uluç Ali distinguished himself in battle and then gathered and brought back to Constantinople together with his ships, all the other surviving vessels of the Ottoman Navy, and a personal homage to Sultan Selim II, the banner of the Knights of Malta. Kılıç in Turkish means sword, and so in this, after Lepanto, Ali the renegade became Ali the sword.
After it fell in the Ottoman hands, and during the 10 years that followed, the ship Lezza Moceniga e Bazzadona disappeared from the records. The new owner, Uluç Ali, who was elevated to the prestigious post of Kabudan Pasha, a Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Navy, after the Battle of Lepanto, probably docked the ship in the port of Valona in order to repair the extensive damages that happened during the capture. After changing the ship's name, he may have even used her in the service of the Ottoman fleet during the War of Cyprus.
After capturing, we lose every trace of our ship.
In Venetian documents, the ship was next mentioned 10 years later. In early November 1581, Uluç Ali decided to sell the ship to a well-known merchant from Constantinople named Odoardo da Gagliano. Odoardo's grandfather, Antonio, the first family member who moved to Constantinople, had two sons. Benedetto was engaged in trade and banking in Pera, the European part of Constantinople in the Galata district, where the Genoese community was situated in the Middle Ages. He maintained close ties to the Ottoman court. His brother Domenico left the family home and settled in Venice to create a solid foundation for family affairs. During his 30-year career, Domenico acquired enviable wealth and reputation and became a member of the prestigious lay fraternity Scuola Grande di San Rocco. Benedetto's son, Odoardo from Constantinople, ran a regular business with his uncle Domenico in Venice.
Certainly Venice is remains one of the greatest centers for global trade, because the 16th century is the moment in which Venice is still a great trading power, but with more and more competitors coming to the picture.
Ships that sailed under the Venetian flag were protected from Christian corsairs, so the ships of the da Gagliano family played a double game. They presented themselves as Venetian, although they had no basis for it, as Odoardo da Galliano lived in Constantinople and was a subject of the Ottoman Sultan.
Da un punto di vista giuridico questo non era possibile perché Odoardo da Galliano era un abitante di Pera, di Costantinopoli, ed era suddito del sultano. Però lui avanzava la pretesa che la nave rimanesse veneziana perché lo zio abitava a Venezia e quindi disse: io l'ho comprata per mio zio che è abitante di Venezia. Giuridicamente non è molto corretto, ma la cosa più importante è che l'ambasciatore veneziano, il bailo veneziano, riconobbe la cittadinanza veneziana della nave.
This would probably have remained undiscovered if not for an incident in 1581, in which Tuscan pirates attacked and looted the ship Galliana e Turiglia, also owned by the da Galliano family. Not having the right to attack Venetian ships, the Tuscan authorities were required to return illegally seized goods, but the Tuscan Duke demanded a thorough investigation. The investigation showed that the ship's owner was not Domenico da Galliano from Venice, as had first appeared, but instead was his nephew, Odoardo from Constantinople. Thus the Venetian origin of the ship was unconfirmed.
The Grand Duke received the information about the true origin of the ship directly from Venice. His spies, obviously very well infiltrated into the Venetian public offices, informed him that the ship had not been entered into any official book of Venice. And the Grand Duke personally informed the deputy about the impossibility of restoring the stolen goods, as in that case he would have to admit the mistake of his admiral, who in that case would have to be beheaded.
When the deception was revealed, Odoardo was compelled to protect his reputation, and thereby also his future business. He thus acquired a genuine Venetian ship, even though it was 10 years old, the Lezza Moceniga e Basadonna, which had been captured in the summer of 1571 by Ulucciali, who still held it.
Nel novembre del 1581 Odoardo da Galliano comperò la nave che un tempo era stata nominata Lezza Moceniga e Basadonna da Ulucciali.
In the spring of 1582, the ship formerly known as the Lezza Moceniga e Basadonna, rechristened as the Galliana Grossa, sailed toward Venice for the first time. The name Galliana referred to its new owner, while the adjective Grossa indicated that the ship had a high deadweight of 1,200 Venetian barrels, or roughly 720 tons.
The new captain of the ship Galliana Grossa becomes Alvise Finardi, whom we already know from the previous stories.
By the second half of the 16th century, the usual ships that carried the most precious materials, the most valuable, were the galleys, because they could be protected very well. They were fighting machines, even if they were carrying goods. There is a growth in piracy in the Mediterranean, with also the English and other pirates attacking the Venetian ships. And so the Venetians decide to shift totally to the so-called round ships that are bigger, manned by less people. There could be only 40, 50 people on board, but they can take a lot of artillery and so defend themselves much better.
The ship was in poor condition and stripped of its original armaments, so the new owner repaired it and re-equipped it with guns.
Nel 1582 vennero fusi dei nuovi cannoni e messi a bordo di questa nave che abbiamo ritrovato come cannoni e fusi appunto del 1582 da Alberghetti. La nave poi ritornò a Costantinopoli e in un secondo viaggio andò a Venezia.
In the early 1580s, amid escalating tensions with the Ottoman Empire, the status of Venice became increasingly uncertain as attacks became more frequent. On the other side, after the death of Suleiman I in 1566, the golden age of the Ottoman Empire ended. During the reign of Suleiman I, Known as Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire had reached the peak of its power. But in the hands of his successors, the status of the Ottomans became uncertain. Suleiman's son, Selim II, managed to maintain the empire, while Suleiman's grandson, Murad III, was better known for his private life and harem than as a successful statesman. On May 24th, 1583, Bailo Giovanni Francesco Morosini, Venetian ambassador in Constantinople, sends an encoded message to the Venetian Senate ordering 5,000 window panes for the reconstruction of the old palace of Murad III.
While the harem quarters at the Topkapı Palace were under reconstruction, a disastrous fire broke out at the old palace in April 1583, and the royal family was forced to move out even further. In May 1583, the Venetian Balio in Istanbul, Francesco Giovanni Morosini, notified the Venetian Senate about this fire, which destroyed the old harem of Murad III.
At the Sultana's orders, fires were lit to dry the walls of the recently constructed baths, but the slave women tending them lost control of the flames, so a destructive fire broke out in the old palace. Sultan Murad III immediately engaged all craftsmen in Constantinople in order to restore it to all of its original glory.
3 weeks later, Morosini notified the Senate about a request for 5,000 pieces of round window panes, which were going to be used for the restoration of the old harem quarters.
One of the confirmations that the ship Galliana Grossa lies on the Gnalij seabed came through the information about the loading of window panes onto the ship, in order to deliver them to the Grand Vizier of Sultan Murad III. This fully corresponded to the situation found at Gnalij in 1967 and the incredible amount of round glass panes scattered throughout the site.
It's a fantastic, I think, representation of what was going on in trade between Venice and what was coming out of Venice to Constantinople, because you have the chemical materials, many different types. You have metalworks, in some cases imported from Germany or from Central Europe to Venice, and then from Venice to Constantinople. We know that there were these silks, 50 more plus meters of silk, glass. In this respect, diplomatic gifts are one of the most interesting things. Exchange between, actually not between Venice and Constantinople, going from Venice to Constantinople.
Venetian patricians decided to use the same ship to send 3 bales of the finest silk as a gift to the Sultan's mother, the equal co-ruler of the Ottoman Empire during the last 9 years of her life, Nurbanu.
Among all the people associated with the cargo of the Galliana Grossa, the one that stands out is Nurbanu Sultan. She was the principal consort and later the legally married wife of Selim II and mother of Murad III, the next Ottoman Sultan.
According to one story, at the age of 12, Nurbanu had been abducted and taken to the Ottoman court by the famed Ottoman admiral Barbarossa, during which time her true identity was lost. One version has it that Venetian senators arbitrarily decided to create a new identity for her as Cecilia Venier Baffo. Thus her father would have been the Venetian noble Niccolo Venier. Other sources identify Nurbanu with Kale Kartanou, the daughter of the Greek Nicholas Kartanos, who had been abducted at Corfu in 1537. Shrouded in a veil of mystery to this day, the dual identity of the famed Sultana, the first in a long line of women who actually administered the empire's affairs over the next century, certainly had its political and probably also private reasons. Regardless of her actual origin, the fact was that the Sultan's mother demonstrated in her policies a great affinity for the Venetian Republic.
There is some uncertainty about Nurbanu's origins, but her frequent correspondence with the Venetian Doge and some other grandees testifies to a peculiar affinity with the Serenissima, which could have been her place of birth. The harem at the Topkapı Palace went through a major institutional and architectural reorganization under Murad III, centering on his mother, Nurbanu Sultan, who was going to be one of the first queen mothers to play a dominant political role at the court in the later part of the 16th century and first part of the 17th century.
The Senate also loaded a bale of brocade for 4 uniforms for the Grand Vizier onto the same ship. The ship's clerk, Simone Fasaneo, was the son of Pietro Fasaneo, or Pietro d'Aliesina. That is the Croatian island of Hvar, a successful merchant and businessman in Venice in the mid-16th century. Still today, a small street in Venice bears his name, Corte Pietro d'Aliesina. It is situated in the Castello Quarter, where many people of Croatian origin lived in the past.
Before boarding the ship Galliana Grossa, Simone Fasaneo, Shimon Fasanic in Croatian, a member of the noble family of the island of Hvar, served as the admiral of the port of Hvar. For unknown reasons, he left his service without permission and was sued by the Duke of Hvar to the Venetian government.
A month before Galliana Grossa set off from Venice, merchant Guglielmo Hellman sent several letters to Antonio Paruta, his agent in Constantinople. Hellman notified Paruta of the pending departure of Galliana, which was supposed to bring to Constantinople a small iron chest and a box wrapped in cloth. The instructions Hellman sent to his agent were rather reserved. Upon the ship's arrival, Paruta had to contact the ship's clerk in order to obtain the 2 aforementioned packages to be directly entrusted to him, which he had stored in his case without recording them in the ship's registers. The experienced businessman Hellman probably proceeded in this manner so that in case of a raid, privateers or pirates could not learn about the existence of the valuables from the ship's records. Despite promises of an imminent departure, the ship remained in port and departure was again postponed. The merchants as well as the ship's owners incurred considerable damages. At the end of October 1583, Alvise Finardi loaded wool fabric, other goods and a chest of personal belongings, while Domenico da Galliano gave him 500 ducats for the ship's expenses and another 500 to feed the sailors. The ship finally set sail from the Venetian port of Malamocco to Constantinople on her last sea voyage. Apparently, the winter of 1583 was extremely dangerous. A few days after the shipwreck of Galliana Grossa, 7 more ships ended on the list of accidents with tragic outcome. Bailo Morosini commented that irresponsible traders should learn to stay away from sailing in the heart of winter at their own expense. We will never know whether the experienced captain foresaw what awaited him in Dalmatian waters on the very eve of the winter sailing moratorium. Similarly, it will probably remain unknown what threatened the heavily laden ship on its overseas voyage. But it is certain that already on November 9th, the heralds of the Venetian Republic declared the horrible news from the stone podium on the Rialto Square. The Galliana Grossa had sunk. There was a rumor that Galliana Grossa sank near the island of Murter, but several miles to the north in the direction of Zadar. Only later, when several survivors returned to Venice, did it become known for certain that the tragic event played out near Zaklopica Cove at the island of Pashman, situated less than 1 nautical mile from the actual shipwreck site at the islet of Gnalic. What caused the shipwreck of Galliana Grossa remains a mystery. Maybe it was caught in a storm, or a fire broke out aboard the ship. Perhaps it was attacked by corsairs, or the amount of cargo was excessive. How many people died in the wreck remains unknown. But 2 human bones were found during the 1973 research campaign. Fortunately, most of the crew managed to survive the wreck. With the help of 2 lifeboats by oars and sails, they reached the eastern shore of nearby Zaklopica Cove. In the next few days, a meeting of all parties interested in salvaging the ship's cargo was convened.
Di solito quando una nave veneziana affondava a Venezia si formava subito un gruppo di persone interessate nel naufragio e quindi gli assicuratori che avevano assicurato le merci dei mercanti, oppure gli stessi mercanti o altre persone che invece avevano caricato a bordo le loro merci senza assicurarle.
A certain Piero della Moneta was charged to organize the salvage operation that would save anything that could be recovered from the sunken ship. Recovering sunken cargo on a single breath in the middle of the winter, and on top of that in the middle of the so-called Little Ice Age, was no easy task. A salvage expert Manoli, nicknamed Fregata, was hired. Manoli had a top reputation in his profession, who could gather a team of vessels in a short time. The Greek diver, obviously undaunted by the cold and restless sea, immediately accepted the task. His best motivation was the pledged 1/3 of the value of the salvaged goods, and the rumors of precious items stored in the clerk's chest.
Si potrebbe immaginare che determinate merci deperibili, come per esempio tessuti, potrebbero non aver avuto nessun valore una volta che le merci erano naufragate in una nave. Invece questo non è così perché c'era un mercato delle merci naufragate, anche perché per legge le merci naufragate non pagavano tasse.
At the end of December, Manoli and his team managed to break into the clerk's cabin and uncover what was far more interesting than a mass of fabric soaked in seawater. In the course of the dives at the end of 1583, Manoli Fregata and his men retrieved the clerk's chest. It contained several sacks full of coins, a small iron chest, and a box wrapped in cloth. When the lead seals were broken, it became clear that Hellman had entrusted to the clerk jewelry, pearls, diamonds, and emeralds of value that far surpassed the sum which formed the basis for the deal struck by Manoli Fregata and Piero della Moneta as compensation for salvaging the sunken cargo.
E allora Manoli Fregata disse: le cose qui non sono come prima, adesso io voglio più soldi, perché c'è una legge del mare antica che dice che quando tu trovi qualcosa in mare tu hai diritto a 1/3 del valore. E allora lui pretese per quei soldi e per quei gioielli che aveva trovato 1/3 del loro valore. E questo creò dei grossi problemi ai mercanti di gioielli che avevano caricato a bordo queste pietre preziose. E quindi dopo una disputa effettivamente Manoli Fregata venne ricompensato con una grossa somma di denaro per aver recuperato i gioielli.
After inventorying all of the valuables, the notary public appointed 2 expert jewelers who determined their value to be 7,243 ducats. This was almost twice the amount claimed for insurance before the ship left for Constantinople.
During March, the owners got their precious stones back, and Manoli received the reward of 3,100 ducats for the goods saved from the chest of the ship's clerk.
And if you think that, the Cadoro on the Grand Canal, which is one of the greatest palaces in Venice, cost 8,000 ducats. So you get a sense.
At the end of March, sufficient goods and ship's gear had been recovered, and salvage operations were stopped. The salvaged goods were returned to Venice and sold. As for the window panes, the Senate promised to send the bylaw a new shipment.
Nurbanu died before both harem restorations were completed, and the cargo of Galliano Grossa never reached Istanbul.
Already the following year, Finardi entered a joint venture with 5 other entrepreneurs. He founded a company and became the captain of another merchant ship.
Alvise Finardi died in 1587 and was buried in the church of San Giuseppe di Castello in Venice, alongside his great friend Giovanni di Vrana. The shipwreck eventually fell into oblivion, and with it, the hope that the rest of the cargo and the ship would ever be recovered. For the next 4 centuries, Galliano Grossa lay quietly at the bottom of the Adriatic, waiting for modern explorers.
Le merci, abbiamo calcolato che tra le merci che hanno diversa origine, i personaggi coinvolti in questa storia, abbiamo un coinvolgimento di circa una ventina di paesi.
To je, kažem vam, 16. 17. stoljeće gdje ta materijalna kultura je bila sasvim nepoznata.
And when we look at this world in which these people lived their lives and then died and then life went on, it's a very interesting role of archaeology to make us look at ourselves as just a little dot on a long line.
You dive at 27 meters under the surface and you face the 4 centuries old stuff. You start to uncover step by step the archaeological site, and in the same time you start to dig deeply into the archives, discovering the documents that are telling the historical story. Suddenly you realize that everything is intertwined, that everything is inseparable, and that our present actually reflects our past.